market, it could be lucrative, but from a scientific point of view, how does this plant molecules interact with the brain? And then more importantly, it led to this whole discovery of this endocannabinoid that Daniele Piamelli's so well. I mean, it's a beautiful system.
Well, I think that's
It's
the
beautiful
survival of
biology.
the fittest of the plant, is because it mimics our natural chemistry, the phytocannabinoids and the endocannabinoids, that we've been willing to risk life and limb to keep this plant or its extraction with us for either medical or spiritual or just food, because we're so attached. Historically, have any of you been able to reach back into history, O'Shaughnessy's, or cultivation back when we required hemp to be grown as a crop for the merchant marine ships? You know, America was Britain's their colony to grow hemp for their merchant ships.
That's how they got it, but it goes back 10,000 years, right?
We're talking millions, yes.
And you know, the early primitive hunt, this is my academic professor mode, right?
Over here, I know.
But
so you're okay with that.
you know, early, you know, 50,000 years ago, these people were incredibly good botanists. They knew what plants you could eat, what you couldn't eat, what works for shoes, what works for medicine. And they knew more botany than we know now, for sure. They did not, cannabis did not escape their use and imagination, as you say, for food, for fiber, for all kinds of things. So it goes back as early as any domesticated crop will go back.
So you might say, Brad, we're not legalizing, we're re-legalizing.
Yeah, we're re-legalizing in many ways, and I want to distinguish between decriminalization activities in other states and what we've done with full-fledged legalization and licensing, because really Prop 64 in many ways is an extension of this line of Prop 47 and 57 and AB 109, a lot of the criminal justice reform that we've had in the state of California. This is another version of that in some ways, and I'll leave it to Bob to explain the legal side of it. But I think that conversation gets lost as we're focused on licensing and tax revenues and new products and the effect that we have on them. And I think it's really important. Some cities like LA and Oakland and San Francisco and some other places are doing a good, Denver, I mean a lot of cities across the country that are doing a good job initiating the conversation, trying to do social equity justice. But I think that I think that academically is a good inroads. Because my public policy for criminal justice, cannabis, and other drugs was built around a platform of building up a curriculum around social issues. There has to be a social issues component to it. And so I think there may be an inroads for some of these programs to get back to this. Why did we legalize in the first place? And a lot of people voted yes on Prop 64 because they didn't like that certain people were being arrested at different rates than others. It was unfair. They didn't want people who were consuming the drug to be arrested. So there's this whole criminal part that we said, oh great, it's legal now. And we're off and running and building this whole regulatory regime and collecting taxes. But I think that on an academic level, we would do well by ourselves to root it in in some of the social equity and some of the social foundations that Prop 64 was ostensibly created for.
Well, and I appreciate you bringing it back full circle to my initial question that seemed to take all of you off guard, and yet all of you wound up bringing it back to that. It is most important as we move forward in public policy, now that we are pretty much agreeing that it's not an if, it's a when, but it's more importantly a who and a how. And the way that we write our public policy, for instance, if we only allow 5 licenses in the entire state of Florida, and the only way you can even apply for a license is if you had 30 years continuous in nurseries to get there. Well, it sounds an awful lot like me, like you can only be a rich white guy to even apply to grow, sell, produce cannabis, otherwise you're a criminal or an employee. And so the way that we form our public policy, we need to make sure that we are demanding that we don't ensconce the new Jim Crow in our new regulatory regimes. And this does come back to a certain degree to how legal aspects are taught, how public policy is taught, because it's not plutonium, it is a plant. And the more small businesses that are allowed to participate, the better your business. You have options, you don't have monopolies, right? This is the American way. And going back to students and opportunity, people of color, people who spent time fighting wars. They didn't own nurseries in Florida years ago either. And so we have that opportunity now in how we demand our public policy is changed. And I really believe that it's important to infuse each of our courses and classes and programs with that point that we're just not there yet, and that each of us have that part to play in academia, because oftentimes that professor is trusted, that student is trusted, especially after you worked with them for years, for months, as their student teachers, as their research associates, that these are the relationships to get that crotchety old, dear Aunt Betty that you never thought you would convince, that we now have that opportunity. And while not everyone believes the facts and figures and all the books are cooked in this current age of fake news, I would remind each of you that your personal story is your power. Talk about how you got here. Talk about why. Talk about what you've seen and what you've witnessed. And I look before me at some of the most powerful testimonials and thought leaders of our time, and I appreciate all the time and energy you've put into this. And I would open it up if there is time for questions, but I would open that to our moderator. Yeah.